Today I want to talk to you about the time Jesus came across a woman who was about to be stoned for adultery. If you go to John 8, 1 through 11, I want to take you through that story. Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered and he sat down and taught them. As he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd. "Teacher," they said to Jesus, "this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say?" They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer. So he stood up again and said, "All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." Then he stooped down again and wrote in the dust. When the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with a woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Did even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." You know, we often use this story in Christianity to talk about not judging others or not throwing stones, and that's a good message. We also use this story to talk about what it's like to be that stoned woman when Jesus offers his ultimate forgiveness for you. That's also a good thing. But whenever we rise from this story and we get, Christ's acceptance and Christ's forgiveness, we should go, just like any story, and look at Christ after that. And if you look at this story, Christ is giving you a perfect example on how to live a Christ-like life when you come across other people and their sins. So I want you to take this sermon today, and I want you to evaluate the things that I'm saying to you and look at these and change the way you treat sinners and the sin that they have within them. Because what we should do in reading all of these stories is look at how Jesus acted. So first, and number one, he resisted the discourse. You see, the crowd wants to encourage your hatred. The Pharisees, they tried their best to get Jesus to condemn this woman. But Jesus wasn't having it. And the crowd around you, sometimes the church, your church friends, your church family, your actual birth family, your friends, your coworkers, they're going to want you to be a part of hating someone. They're going to have a certain group they think is deserving of hate. They're going to have a certain person they think is deserving of judgment. And they're going to want you to approve of that by joining them. And so you have to be weary of that and resist that level of discourse. Because you can also respond to that by being, violently angry with them and judging them as well. But if you got to look at it this way, you got to look at it one way, look at it this way. If it sounds like hatred, it's worldly. If it sounds like it's filled with love, it's Christ-like. So in every situation, when you come across a sinner, you can be the Pharisees and be filled with hatred, or you can be Christ and filled with love. So as you're going through your day-to-day, if you find yourself being more filled with hatred, then you're more Pharisee-like than Christ-like, and that's something you need to reevaluate and change. Every word you say, or every word you type if you're a Facebook warrior, needs to be thought through in order to convey love. If you're talking to someone, talk to them with love. If you're making a post or you see something you want to share, don't open your mouth, don't hit the share button, don't hit the like button, don't type it out unless it's filled with love. Then what you have to do after that is to continue that love process over and over again. It's difficult. Love is not a decision that you make one time and get it right. You have to continue to make it. There's going to be opportunities for you to share statuses that you think are great, and they vibe with what you feel, but they're too filled with hatred. So you've got to make sure you're looking at the amount of love in everything you're doing. Then you have to do what Jesus also did here. He stopped the group's judgment. He didn't allow any stone throwing. You see, when we talk about this story, a lot of times we talk about the fact that, you shouldn't throw stones. And that's a good thing to remember. We as Christians should not be throwing stones. You shouldn't be passing judgment on other people. We all know if you've done one sin, you're guilty of them all. We all know that today we're all going to sin 70 times, 7 times. And we've all heard these things. We all know, but we have to continually remind ourselves that we too are tempted and also fail into sin sometimes. But What's not good enough is to not judge other people. You see, Jesus, what he did in that story wasn't just not judging her. He didn't just not stone her. He challenged the Pharisees' judgment on her. It's not enough as a Christian that you're not passing judgment or throwing stones. Just like Jesus did, you have to stop the others from doing so as well. You're going to have, like I said earlier, crowds of people around you who want to pass judgment or throw stones at people. And they want to make, blanket statements about people because of some choices that they make. And it's going to be your job as a Christian who's living a Christ-filled life and a Christ-like life. It's going to be your job to make sure they don't throw any stones. Because the story isn't about how Jesus watched a woman get stoned, but he didn't throw a stone at her. The story is how a woman was going to be stoned and Jesus didn't allow it. So you can no longer allow this level of judgment in people's lives, and you can no longer allow stone throwing. And it's going to take difficulty, because there's going to be bosses or co-workers who you have to challenge. There's going to be family members you have to challenge. There's going to be church members you have to challenge. You may have to challenge church leaders. You shouldn't have to, but you're going to sometimes. And you have to be willing to be Christ-like and challenge them and say, well, what makes you able to throw a stone? Then you have to look at the people, the person, not the sin. You see, sin is not a personhood identifier to Christ. When the Pharisees came in, they said, Jesus, look, we have an adulteress. She's a cheater. She's a sinner. She needs to be stoned. But what Jesus saw was a woman. He didn't see her for her sins. He didn't see her for the act that she just committed. He didn't see her as a woman who needed to be stoned or judged. He saw a woman. Sin is not the defining factor of a person's life. So you've got to stop saying things that sound like that. You look at them and you go, look at the drug addicts over there, or look at these groups of young people. They're so amoral and immoral. They don't have any values. Look at the alcoholics, or that guy over there, he's covered in tattoos and doesn't know how to dress. He doesn't even have a suit for church. Look at that girl over there. She's so promiscuous. She's a whore. She's a harlot. She's just filled with nothing but promiscuity, and all she can do is sleep around. And you look around and you see a group of people and you say, look at the gays, and look at the LGBTQ community and all those transgenders, and look at all of these people. Just look at them, and you're basically taking all of these people and you're identifying them as one pinpointed thing that you're defining as sin in their life. So you can't do that, because Christ didn't do that to that woman, and he also didn't do that to you. Every person is a child and a creation of God, and you don't get to not love them because you don't approve of their behavior. If you don't agree with the fact that they drink, if you don't agree with the fact that they smoke marijuana, if you don't agree with the fact that they're addicted to drugs, maybe they're violent, maybe they're young and they listen to raunchy music, or maybe it's Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B and you think they're ruining the world by making their music. You think that anybody who listens to their music is going to hell. You think that anybody in your life that you disagree with, you think maybe their gender identity isn't right by your standards, and the fact that they choose to love someone of their same gender or their ethnicity or problems like that, you think all of these things qualify them as sinners, and so you're judging them as a sinner rather than seeing them as a person. And every person, whether they want to accept it or not, whether they believe in it or not, they all have one common factor. We are all creations and children of God, the Father. He's not just your Father, he's their Father. And some of these things that you're looking at, you're not qualified to call a sin. It's not your job to dictate what and is not a sin to people. It's also not your job to identify them as such. Your brother who's an alcoholic, he's your brother, not an alcoholic. Don't define him like that. You see, when you take identification from someone, what you're doing is you're taking the Christ identity in them and you're pushing it to the side, and you're passing your judgment on them. When Christ didn't do that to this woman. So what gives us the right to do that to anybody? What gives us the right to do that to any singular human being? You might say, well, Joe, they're agnostic, they're atheist, they're Muslim, they're gay, they're promiscuous, the girl's a whore, the man's a cheater. You might say, oh, he's addicted to drugs, or he's a bum on the side of the road, he doesn't have a job. Joe, he voted for Biden. Joe, he voted for Donald Trump. How can this happen? What are we doing? What are we saying? You're saying that the person's sin is the defining factor in their life, and that is an outright lie. It's not true. And also, I hate to break it to some of you, according to being a Christ-like Christian and according to Christ-like behavior, you don't even get to be mean to them. Christ wasn't mean to this woman. He wasn't judgmental to her. He didn't say, well, you know what? You do what you do. You love who you love. You do what you want to do. I'm not going to pass judgment on you, but I can't stand you. You're going to have to invite those people in. That guy with tattoos and alcohol in his hands, you're going to have to invite him in. Your nephew who is in transition, you're going to have to invite that person in. That non-binary coworker you have, you're going to have to invite them into your life. The girl you think is a promiscuous whore, you're going to have to invite her into your life. That kid on the side of the road who's holding up a sign and you're calling a bum because he doesn't have a job, you're going to have him in your life. There's going to be people at your Thanksgiving and at your Christmas who voted for Biden and Trump. You have to accept both of them. There are going to be people who are in traditional marriages and there are people who are in gay marriages. You're going to have to love them either way. You're going to have to bring them into your life. You don't get to exclude anyone because of their sin. You see, Christ doesn't have an exclusionary type of mentality. That's a Pharisee mentality. So if you want to be Christ-like, really, you have to allow anybody into your life and love them. That's what Christ did, and I can't understand how Christians think they can do anything different. Number 4, how do you do that? Well, you got to be compassionate. When Christ came across sinners, he was extremely compassionate to them. And he made sure that all roads led to forgiveness and led to redemption. So when you're having a communication with someone who think their lifestyle is wrong and you don't believe in what they believe in, you have to make sure that you're a bridge to them, that you go from their life and you're the bridge for Christ to enter their life. You know, when you talk to them, you have to make sure the words that you use create a bridge that leads to forgiveness, that leads to redemption, that leads to sanctification, that leads to saving from Christ, that leads to the blood of Christ washing over them. And you don't do that by being, angry or violent or upset or filled with hatred. You do that with compassion and love. You see, Christ was gentle with that woman, but he also treated her softer than he did the Pharisees. He expected more of the religious people. And you have to remember that the only thing separating, you from the sinner that you're looking at and judging is that you've accepted Christ into your life. That's it. Because you're still a sinner. You're still sinning today. In terms of verbiage, you are still going to go sin later. I'm going to get off of this sermon and I'm going to go out throughout my week and I'm going to try my best and fail and I'm going to sin. That's why Christ had to come down and do it himself. I can't be perfect. You can't be perfect. Both of us, or all of us watching together, we can't lead a sin-free life. That's why Christ had to come do it. You see, Christ died on the cross for our sins because he knew we couldn't do that. So he fulfilled the law for us. So we're living in the compassion of Christ dying for our sins, and then we're forcing other people to live by the law. You should be guiding them into grace, bridging them into love, using your compassion and your kind heart to bring them to faith, to bring them into the pact that is God's clean grace through Jesus. And if someone is trapped by their sin, you've got to help them. You've got to guide them. Life is like a road, and the path is sometimes it's not, well traveled, and it's hard to see, and sometimes it gets dark, and there are dangers in the path, and it's easy to sway and move and find yourself off the tracks. Well, that's where you come in. That's where other good people come in. Other Christians come in. They do their job and they help you. Do your job and help that other guy. He's on the side of the road. He needs help. He's stumbling here and there. He needs you to come in and be a light to them. And you don't be a light by being anything other than being compassionate. Love is always the key element in handling sin. If you look at Jesus in the Bible, the key element in all the ways that he handled all the sin and all of the people that he came across was that he loved them. So love is something that is an inarguable element of handling sin. You don't get to change that. And lastly, number 5, do not condemn. Even Christ withheld condemnation when he had the chance. When he was alone with this woman and the crowd had circled, all the judges and the Pharisees, they left, and it was just Jesus and the woman in the crowd. And he said to her, Well, where did all of your accusers go? Did any of them condemn you? She said, no. At that moment, he had every authority to condemn her. But what he did is he told her, I don't condemn you either. Get up, go and sin no more. How can we do anything different when our own Savior is showing you such a perfect example? Condemnation is not the key. Condemnation is not a part of the equation for you. You see, we've heard this story, like I said before, where it tells you not to cast stones because you're not without sin. Well, look at it this way. When Christ said, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, Christ was the he who didn't have any sin. He had every right to throw that stone, but he didn't, because all of his roads led to forgiveness and redemption. He didn't need stones for that. You see, you don't need stone throwing and judgment to save lives. That's not how it works. Telling people they're going to hell just creates dissent. I know a lot of angry atheists who've been told they're going to hell, and they're angry about it. I know a lot of angry Muslims who've been told their faith is going to lead them to hell. I know a lot of, sorrow-filled people in the LGBTQ community who've been told consistently that their lifestyle is leading them to hell. And they've been battered by it, and they've been abused by it, and they've been attacked by it. And all of these people, I continue to hear this common denominator where they're told they're going to hell, but no one's telling them about Jesus. Where did we go wrong? Why are we speaking about condemnation and not salvation? And, if you spend your words telling people they're going to hell and not about the love of God, you're the one who's trapped by your sin. You're the one with a hate-filled heart. There are so many people online who are attacking so many people. Right now it's Pride Month, and I'm seeing a consistent amount of Christians just battering the LGBTQ community. And what's happening is they're going so far right that they're actually circling back to the left. You're actually going so far into judging people and not being a part of their lifestyle that you end up on the other side, and now you're the sinner. If you find yourself consistently sharing messages about how it's wrong and about how this person's lifestyles are wrong and about how if you're an alcoholic you're going to hell, about how drug addiction is an evil thing, about how being an atheist leads to hell, but you're not telling people about the love and life of Jesus Christ, you're actually sinning equally. You're letting yourself down. You see, you're turning into the Pharisees in that moment. You see, some of us, the true story of this is that we all start off as the woman. We all start off as the adulteress. And when Christ says, get up and go on, I don't condemn you, we're supposed to go on and lead a life that's Christ-like, that's been illuminated by the Spirit of Jesus Christ. But some people have gotten up, walked away, and turned into the Pharisees and come back and are bringing people to Jesus so they can hate on them. Well, you've got to get away from that. You've got to get away from the condemnation, because ultimately, if you're telling people they're going to hell, how's that going to make them want to know Jesus? You are a light. If you're supposed to be Christ-like, let's put ourselves in other people's shoes. If you're, transgendered and you walk into a church and people are yelling at you, telling you to get out of the church, telling you don't belong, not allowing you to use your spiritual gifts in the church, and telling you you're going to hell, the pastor stopping the sermon to make sure you know what you're doing is wrong, and the whole day becomes about the condemnation of your life and only your life. Well, that person, let's think about this. If that's what a bunch of Christ-like people are doing to you, how would that make you want to understand and know Jesus Christ? As Christians, we can't have questions as to how people don't want to know Jesus, because so many of us are being judgmental, not being compassionate. We're willing to throw the stone. We're actually the Pharisees bringing the hatred to Jesus. In that story, in that example, and you should be able to see through their eyes, you should be able to see that doesn't make you want to know Jesus. Our job is to make people hungry to know the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And you don't do that by telling people about hellfire and brimstone. You do that by telling them about the love and life of Jesus Christ that props you up. If you've got a brother who's got a drug addiction, help him. And do so by showing him examples of Christ's love. By saying to him, I was actually trapped and bound once myself, but through the blood of Christ that's been washed over my body, I've been able to overcome my sin, and now I'm not bound by it anymore. And better yet, now Because I've accepted the love of Jesus Christ and I accepted him as my Savior, when I make a mistake and I do sin, I'm not bound to hell. It's not that I could go around the world and do whatever I want. It's that I don't have the desire to sin. And when I do, Christ already knows that my heart doesn't feel right about it. Get that kind of love in people's hearts and have them understand that they're not alone in the world and that you too had the same problems. That you too struggled with the same things and the same problems maybe. Maybe you were a drug addict, or maybe you were an alcoholic, or maybe you weren't the best husband or wife, or maybe you were wild and reckless in your youth. Maybe you were promiscuous when you were younger. Maybe you had questions about your gender, or maybe you had questions about what you wanted to do and be with your life, and you had questions about your faith, and you had questions about maybe you were an atheist and now you're a Christian, or maybe all of these things sound like some of you. But what I don't want to sound like anybody anymore is I was the person who tried faith, but the Christians were so mean to me, so hurtful to me, so judgmental, so full of condemnation, so Pharisee-like, that I don't want to know God. I don't want anybody to have that mentality anymore. And that comes down to us as Christians and how we treat people and how we don't see people as their sin. We see people as people. And that we keep ourselves grounded in the knowledge that we too were once struggling. And we still are struggling, but we're propped up by the acceptance of Jesus. I'm going to close with a couple of thoughts. In the world, there's like a sliding scale. You have love, like, indifference, dislike, and hate. And that's what the world teaches you. Everybody you meet falls into one of those categories. You may not hate them, but you probably dislike them. If you don't dislike them and you don't like them, you're indifferent to them. Maybe you like them, but you don't love them. Or maybe you love them. Maybe you hate them. Maybe you hate an entire group of people or love an entire group of people. Without knowing anything about them, you just love them. Or you just hate them. It doesn't work that way in the Spirit. In the Spirit, there are two options: love and sin. Where do you want to be? As a Christian, where do you want to fall? Do you want to be sinful and hateful like the Pharisees? Or do you want to be love-filled like Christ? Do you want to treat people with hate and vitriol? Or do you want to treat people with forgiveness and acceptance? What do you want to do? What is it about your life that you want people to remember? Do you want them to remember you as a person full of disdain? Or do you want them to remember you as someone who loved them? I know what I want to be. I know what I'm striving to be. But what about you? You've got to take time to make sure all of your interactions aren't filled with disdain and hatred, that you're not a part of the hive mentality of the world, that you don't let that mentality of the world bleed into your spirit, that you don't just treat people with disgust because of their decision making. You don't forget that people are people. And you don't forget to love anybody. My last and final thought is this. Christ loved the sin out of you. Go love people the same way, no matter what you think of their life. Love them. Introduce them to Christ. Treat them with compassion and kindness. It doesn't matter if they're black, white, Hispanic, or something else. It doesn't matter if they're man or woman or non-binary. It doesn't matter if they're transgendered. It doesn't matter if they're gay or bisexual. It doesn't matter if they're a lesbian. It doesn't matter if they're a drug addict. It doesn't matter if they voted for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. It doesn't matter if they watch the same sport as you. It doesn't matter if they're rich or poor. It doesn't matter if they're Christian or atheist or agnostic or Muslim. It doesn't matter if they agree with you on political matters, on social matters. It doesn't matter if their blue lives matter or black lives matter. None of that matters to whether or not you should love them. You're allowed your opinions, but you're not allowed to not love people. Remember, Christ once loved the sin out of you. Other people deserve that love too. Go give it to him.